In this hypothetical scenario based on publicly available doctrine and known military capabilities, we explore what would happen if Iranian fast attack craft pushed the line too far against a United States Navy warship protecting commercial shipping in one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth. Picture the Strait of Hormuz at dawn, a narrow corridor of water barely 21 miles wide at its choking point. Every single day, roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through this bottleneck. Supertankers the length of 3 football fields, riding low in the water, loaded with millions of barrels of crude. They move slowly, predictably, and they cannot dodge. Now imagine 7 Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy fast attack craft, each one barely 15 meters long, screaming across the water at 50 knots. They are heading straight for a commercial tanker flying an Allied flag, and a United States Navy destroyer is the only thing standing between them. Here is the question most people never think to ask. In a confrontation like this, the most powerful Navy in the world does not have the luxury of simply pulling the trigger. The destroyer captain has to make a decision that balances physics, politics, international law, and the global economy in a matter of seconds, and the Iranians know it. That tension, that gap between capability and permission, is the real battlefield. And by the end of this video, you will understand why the ocean itself is the most dangerous weapon in the room. But first you need to understand the geography, because the Strait of Hormuz does not play fair with anyone. Most people look at a map and see a simple channel between Iran and Oman. What they do not see is that the navigable water is far narrower than the strait itself. Commercial ships must follow traffic separation schemes, essentially underwater highways, each one only 2 miles wide with a 2-mile buffer zone in between. That means every supertanker is locked into a predictable lane, moving at a predictable speed, at predictable times. For a Navy trying to protect those ships, this is a nightmare. You cannot maneuver freely when you are tied to a convoy route, and for anyone looking to cause trouble, it is a gift. The Iranian coastline along the strait is dotted with hidden inlets, fortified islands, and underground missile batteries carved into the rock. The 3 islands of Abu Musa, Greater Tunb, and Lesser Tunb sit right in the shipping lanes, giving Iran forward operating positions that can observe and threaten passing vessels without ever leaving their own territorial claims. But here is the part most people miss. The water itself is the problem. The Strait of Hormuz is shallow, in many places only about 60 meters deep. For submarines, this is almost useless. There is no room to hide beneath thermal layers. For surface ships, the shallow depth creates unpredictable sonar conditions, with sound bouncing off the seabed in chaotic patterns. Mines, which Iran has stockpiled by the thousands, become exponentially more dangerous in shallow water because there is less room for ships to navigate around them. And it gets worse. The heat plays a role that no tactical manual fully captures. Surface temperatures in the Persian Gulf regularly exceed 35 degrees Celsius. That superheated water creates a persistent layer of evaporation just above the surface, a phenomenon known as atmospheric ducting. Radar signals bend and distort as they pass through this layer, creating false returns and reducing effective detection range for low-flying objects, exactly the profile of a fast attack craft skimming the waves at high speed. Even infrared sensors struggle to distinguish the thermal signature of a small boat engine against the blazing heat radiating from the water itself. So the United States Navy is not operating in open ocean, where its technological advantages are overwhelming. It is operating in a confined, cluttered, thermally distorted, acoustically chaotic environment where speed and surprise can offset even the most advanced combat systems. Now this is where the ocean lies to you. When you hear that the United States Navy has a destroyer in the strait, you might picture a dominant warship controlling everything around it, and in open water, that picture would be accurate. An Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer is a marvel of engineering, equipped with the Aegis combat system, the most sophisticated integrated air and missile defense network ever put to sea. Its phased array radar can track hundreds of targets simultaneously while computing firing solutions for every one of them. It carries a mix of surface-to-air missiles, cruise missiles, torpedoes, a 5-inch gun, and close-in weapons systems designed to shred incoming threats at the last second, On paper, it is an overwhelming advantage against small boats. But paper does not float. In the confined waters of the strait, that destroyer faces a paradox. Its sensors are designed to operate across hundreds of miles of open ocean. In the strait, the radar picture is cluttered with hundreds of contacts: fishing boats, cargo ships, dhows, oil service vessels, and mixed in with all of that civilian traffic, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy fast attack craft that are deliberately designed to look like fishing boats until the very last moment. This is the swarm doctrine, and it exploits a fundamental vulnerability in how Western navies process information. The Aegis system can see everything. That is not the problem. The problem is deciding which of those 200 contacts on the screen is a threat and which is a fisherman hauling nets. That decision requires human judgment, and human judgment requires time. In a swarm attack, time is the one thing you do not have. The Iranian fast attack craft closed the distance at 50 knots. At that speed, a boat 5 miles away reaches the destroyer in roughly 6 minutes. But the decision to engage must account for rules of engagement, positive identification of hostile intent, and the catastrophic political consequences of getting it wrong. Sinking a fishing boat full of civilians in the Persian Gulf would be a strategic disaster that no amount of military victory could offset, and Tehran knows this. That is the trap. But the trade-off cuts both ways, and this is where the calculation bends in ways that Tehran may not fully appreciate. Those fast attack craft are fast, yes. They are cheap, yes. They are numerous, yes. But they are also extraordinarily fragile. A single burst from a 25mm chain gun tears through fiberglass like paper. They carry no armor, no defensive systems, no electronic countermeasures. Their crews are exposed on open decks, and their weapons, typically rocket-propelled grenades, heavy machine guns, and occasionally anti-ship cruise missiles on the larger variants, must be aimed and fired from a platform that is bouncing violently across waves at high speed. Accuracy at those speeds, in those sea conditions against a maneuvering target, is extremely poor. The Iranian strategy depends entirely on getting close enough that accuracy does not matter, and on overwhelming the defender with sheer numbers before effective countermeasures can be deployed. The United States Navy has spent decades studying exactly this problem, and the solutions they have developed are not what most people expect. So what does the United States Navy actually do when those 7 fast boats start their run? This is where doctrine meets reality, and the answer is not a single weapon. It is a system. The first layer of defense is not a gun or a missile. It is communication. The destroyer broadcasts warnings on international maritime frequencies, in English and Farsi, ordering the approaching vessels to alter course and maintain safe distance. This is not politeness. This is a legal requirement under the rules of engagement and international maritime law. It establishes a clear record that the approaching vessels were warned, which matters enormously in the political aftermath. Simultaneously, the ship's electronic warfare suite begins actively monitoring the electromagnetic spectrum around the approaching craft. If those boats activate targeting radar or weapons guidance systems, that emission is detected instantly and classified as hostile intent. This is the invisible tripwire. But here is where the sequence gets tactically fascinating. While the warnings are being broadcast and the electronic warfare operators are listening, the destroyer is also physically repositioning. It places itself between the tanker and the approaching threat, using its own hull as a shield. The 5-inch gun mount rotates to track the lead boat. The close-in weapons system, a radar-guided Gatling gun capable of firing 4,500 rounds per minute, spins up and begins tracking autonomously. On the fantail, sailors man 50 caliber heavy machine guns and 25mm chain guns. Helicopters, if available, launch from the flight deck, carrying door-mounted weapons and additional sensors that can provide overhead surveillance of the entire engagement area. The MH-60R Seahawk helicopter, in particular, adds a critical dimension. It can deploy rapidly, loiter over a threat area for hours, and provide targeting data that the destroyer's own sensors may not capture due to radar clutter from nearby islands and civilian traffic. An unmanned aerial vehicle may also be airborne, quietly circling at altitude, streaming video and infrared imagery back to the Combat Information Center, where watch officers can study the approaching boats in granular detail, counting weapons, identifying command boats, and reading hull markings. And beneath all of this visible activity, something far more important is happening on the data networks. The destroyer is sharing its tactical picture in real time with every allied asset in the region through secure tactical data links. Other warships, patrol aircraft, unmanned aerial vehicles, and shore-based command centers all see the same picture simultaneously. If the situation escalates, reinforcements do not need to be briefed. They are already watching. Now let us talk about what happens if the warnings fail and the boats keep coming, because that is the scenario everyone wants to understand, and the reality is more nuanced than a simple firefight. The United States Navy employs a graduated response doctrine that moves through distinct phases, each one designed to give the approaching force one final opportunity to break off before the next level of force is applied. After verbal warnings, the next step is visual deterrence. The destroyer may fire pyrotechnic warning flares or deploy its long-range acoustic device, a directed sound weapon that can project an unbearable tone at specific targets over a mile away without causing permanent harm. The ship may also execute aggressive maneuvering, turning its bow directly toward the approaching boats and accelerating, creating a massive wake that can swamp small craft. This maneuver sends an unmistakable physical message. I see you, and I am not yielding. If the boats continue to close, the rules of engagement authorize warning shots. The 5-inch gun fires ahead of the approaching formation, placing explosive rounds in the water directly in their path. The concussive impact of a 5-inch shell detonating on the surface is enormous. Even at a distance, the shockwave and the geyser of water it produces make the message viscerally clear. The next rounds will not miss. And this is the critical decision point for the Iranian boat commanders, because what comes next is not a warning, it is physics. But there is a hidden dimension to this confrontation that rarely makes the headlines, and it is arguably more important than any weapon system. The real battle is happening in the information domain. From the moment those fast attack craft leave their hidden berths along the Iranian coastline, they are being watched, not just by the destroyer in the strait, but by a layered surveillance architecture that stretches from the seabed to orbit. United States Navy Maritime Patrol aircraft, the Boeing P-8A Poseidon, fly continuous patrols over the strait and the Persian Gulf. These aircraft carry advanced surface search radar, electro-optical and infrared sensors, and electronic support measures that can detect and classify every emission in the electromagnetic spectrum. They see the boats before the boats even know they are being observed. Above the P-8A, satellites provide persistent, wide-area surveillance. Synthetic aperture radar satellites can image the sea surface through clouds and darkness, tracking vessel movements over time and building pattern-of-life databases that reveal which boats are fishing vessels and which ones operate on military schedules. This intelligence is fused into the common operating picture that every commander in the theater can access. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy believes it is launching a surprise attack. In reality, the United States Navy has been watching the preparations for hours, possibly days. The element of surprise belongs not to the attacker, but to the defender who chooses when and how to reveal what it knows. And that is when the kill chain bends in a direction that changes everything. Because the United States Navy does not need to destroy those boats to win. It needs to make Iran's leadership understand that every single one of those boats is already inside a targeting solution before it ever reaches weapons range. This is the concept of deterrence through demonstrated capability, and it is far more powerful than any missile. When the Iranian boat commander looks up and sees a Poseidon banking overhead, when his radio crackles with a warning that includes his exact speed and heading, when he realizes that the helicopter circling a mile away has a weapons lock on his craft, the calculus changes. He is no longer a wolf hunting a sheep. He is a target that has been permitted to exist. And the moment that realization sets in, the strategic objective is already achieved. But here is the catch. And this is the part that keeps Pentagon planners awake at night. Deterrence only works if the other side is rational. If the Iranian boat commander is following orders from a command structure that has decided to accept casualties for a political objective, then all the surveillance and all the warnings in the world will not stop the attack. This is the nightmare scenario. A deliberate, politically motivated assault where the attackers know they will not survive, but press the attack anyway to create an international crisis, to spike oil prices, to fracture alliance cohesion, or to provoke a response that Iran can exploit in the information war. In that scenario, the engagement becomes purely kinetic and it happens with terrifying speed. The close-in weapon system engages at 1,500 meters, creating a wall of tungsten projectiles that shreds the lead boats. The 25mm chain guns and 50 caliber machine guns engage the flanking craft. The 5-inch gun, now firing in direct engagement mode, delivers high explosive rounds with devastating precision. A helicopter overhead rakes the water with its own weapons. In less than 90 seconds, the engagement is over. The water is filled with debris and fuel, and the political consequences begin. This is the trade-off that defines every encounter in the Strait of Hormuz. The United States Navy has the capability to annihilate any swarm attack within minutes, but every engagement, no matter how justified, carries enormous political risk. A military victory in the Strait can become a political defeat in capitals around the world. Dead bodies on the evening news, burning wreckage, accusations of disproportionate force. Iran does not need to sink the tanker to win. It needs the confrontation to happen at all. That is the asymmetry that makes this theater so uniquely dangerous. So let us consider how this plays out across 3 possible pathways, because the outcome depends entirely on decisions made not at sea, but in offices thousands of miles away. In the first pathway, de-escalation through signaling, the United States Navy's visible and invisible presence convinces Iranian commanders that the cost of pressing the attack exceeds any possible benefit. The fast boats close to within a few miles probe the destroyer's reaction, and then peel away. Both sides claim victory. Tehran says it demonstrated its ability to challenge American power. Washington says its deterrent posture prevented an attack. Tensions remain high, but no shots are fired and the oil keeps flowing. This is the most likely outcome in any given encounter, and it is the one that receives the least media attention precisely because nothing visibly happened. In the second pathway, information advantage reshapes the battlefield. The United States Navy uses its surveillance dominance to preempt the swarm before it forms. Maritime patrol aircraft and intelligence assets identify the staging of fast attack craft at known Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy bases. Diplomatic channels are activated. Back-channel messages communicate that the preparations have been observed and that any sortie will be met with overwhelming force. Simultaneously, the United States repositions additional assets into the strait, making the force imbalance visible on every radar screen in the region. Iran, facing a defender that has already anticipated and prepared for every possible move, postpones the operation. No boats leave the harbor, no confrontation occurs, and critically, no one outside the intelligence community ever knows how close things came. This is the quiet victory that never makes the news, and it happens far more often than the public realizes. In the third pathway, logistics and geography become the silent winner. This is the long game, and it is the one that matters most. The United States Navy cannot maintain a permanent maximum readiness posture in the strait indefinitely. Ships need maintenance, crews need rest. Fuel and ammunition must be replenished. The logistics chain that keeps a destroyer combat-ready 12,000 miles from its home port is an extraordinary feat of engineering and planning, but it has limits. Iran, operating from bases just miles away, has no such constraint. It can sustain low-level provocations indefinitely, forcing the United States to maintain an expensive and exhausting presence. Over time, this creates pressure to find diplomatic solutions, to build regional partnerships that share the burden of strait security, and to develop new technologies that reduce the manpower and ship days required to maintain deterrence. The real winner in the Strait of Hormuz may not be the side with the best weapons, but the side with the deepest patience and the most sustainable strategy. And this brings us to the bigger picture that most analysis misses entirely. Naval power in the Strait of Hormuz is not primarily about combat. It is about the credible ability to keep the strait open for commercial traffic. That single mission, freedom of navigation, is the foundation on which the global economy rests. Every barrel of oil that flows through the strait without interruption is a victory for the system of international trade that benefits billions of people. Every confrontation that is deterred, de-escalated, or resolved without disrupting that flow is a success that no headline will ever celebrate. The destroyer captain in the strait is not just commanding a warship. That captain is managing a political instrument, an economic guarantee, and a military deterrent simultaneously. The weapons are the last resort. The sensors, the communications, the intelligence, the alliances, and the judgment of the people operating the system are what actually keep the oil flowing and the peace, however fragile, intact. The Strait of Hormuz remains the world's most dangerous choke point, not because of the weapons aimed at it, but because of what flows through it. And as long as the global economy depends on that flow, the quiet professionals of the United States Navy and its allies will continue to stand watch in those narrow, shallow, contested waters, making decisions in seconds that echo for decades. This is your question to consider. If deterrence depends on the other side being rational, what happens when it faces an adversary willing to absorb losses for a political objective? Is there a technological solution? Or is this ultimately a problem that only diplomacy can solve? Share your analysis in the comments. If this breakdown helped you understand the real dynamics behind the headlines, consider subscribing and turning on notifications, because the next deep dive will take us inside a confrontation most people have never heard of. This video is for educational purposes only, based on public information. It is not operational advice and should not be used to plan harm or wrongdoing.